The Honourable Mark Butler, who is the Australian Minister for Health, Ageing, Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme, has recently announced that there will be some changes to the NDIS, namely that people with mild to moderate developmental delay and autism no longer really have a place on the NDIS. Why? Because the NDIS is made for people with permanent and significant disability. That has raised some eyebrows, including, as you can see, mine, because developmental delay, while not always permanent, is certainly significant, and autism, while not always a significant disability depending on the person experiencing it, is most certainly permanent. So it's an interesting take to kind of put a blanket statement out there that those particular conditions do not fit under the NDIS umbrella in the NDIS family. So I'm going to be going through the speech he gave on the 20th of August to the National Press Club, and I'm going to be, going through his thoughts and feelings and emotions and motivations, and I'm going to give my thoughts and feelings and emotions and motivations. So let's have a look at this and let's see how angry I get. So I'm going to be sharing bits of his speech, piece by piece. I'm going to be linking the speech in the description, and I'm going to be just highlighting the parts of the speech that I am quoting on the screen so you can still read everything else. It's an interesting speech. It's an interesting speech to read. But I'm going to read some of his speech and then give my thoughts and responses. Within just 12 years, Australia's NDIS has gone from a dream of generations of disability activists to an entrenched and beloved national institution. This is an institution that is entrenched in controversy quite often because it often makes decisions without consulting, or perhaps consulting and then dismissing the advice of disability advocates. So that's whenever people who are involved in the NDIS at this level talk about the NDIS, they talk about it as a beloved institution, as an appreciated institution, almost as an institution above reproach, which is a weird take when you start a speech like this. If you start a speech like this and put the NDIS up on a pedestal, then a lot of us who are experiencing it firsthand and experience the kind of brutal reality of it are going to be a little bit sus. The NDIS has grown incredibly fast and well beyond projections. I've spoken before about how the projections for the needs of the NDIS were built on inaccurate data. Essentially, it was assumed that the only people who would need disability services were the people already using them, and it didn't take into account or into consideration the people who were needing those services but who had no funding for them and instead relied on unpaid family members. These were people like me who very rightly were granted access to the NDIS because we passed the eligibility criteria, but because we hadn't accessed disability services before, it was like our years of disability hadn't existed until that moment. So my mother had been my carer for many years. She was receiving a carer's pension from Centrelink, but those numbers weren't counted. It was really just the numbers of people receiving disability services. It's not that so many more people have become disabled or that too many people are trying to access the NDIS. It's that the original scheme didn't take everyone into account in the first place, and that awareness of disability has risen. And so the people who were already disabled are now reaching out for help. Today, I want to focus on two substantial challenges. First, returning the scheme to its original purpose, its North Star, the provision of support to people with significant and permanent care and support needs. That's never changed. To be able to get even close to approved for the NDIS, you need to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your disability is permanent and that no treatments will ever cure it, and that it impacts your daily life in a significant way that is beyond that of the needs of people without your disability. If you can't meet those criteria, and let's be for real, sometimes even if you do meet those criteria, you won't even be considered for the NDIS unless there's something sticky going on. Originally intended to support around 410,000 people with disability, the scheme now supports just under 740,000 and is projected to grow to 1 million by 2034. I just want to give some numbers. In 2013, the year that the NDIS was introduced, there were over 820,000 people on the disability support pension in Australia. Now, not all of these people would require NDIS support or benefit from it, but they all had disabilities that would affect their functionality in significant ways. And to get a disability support pension in Australia, you need to show that it is essentially permanent. Otherwise, you just get medical exemptions from work or medical exemptions from job seeker. You can only get a disability support pension if you show that your disability is there to stay and it's not responding to treatment. So, and this number also doesn't include children because children don't need a DSP. So you could make an educated guess if you're looking at these numbers that there probably would have been more than 410,000 people with permanent and significant disabilities requiring support in Australia at the time, at least enough to make you do a little more research into your numbers. So if you were looking at what are our projections for the NDIS for people who need disabilities, instead of looking at the people accessing disability supports, look at the people who are accessing other disability supports. Look at people on the DSP. Look at people who have family members with carer support pensions. You could have known. You could have known a little bit better. Recent research by Talbot Mills found that 7 in 10 Australians agreed the NDIS plays a vital role in improving the lives of people with a disability. But 7 in 10 also agreed that the NDIS has grown too large and is struggling with inefficiencies and dodgy providers. 6 in 10 agreed the NDIS is broken. So let's break it a little more, I guess. Let's break one of the fundamental tenets of the NDIS. That'll help. Also, he admits the real culprit there, dodgy providers. This was part of my issue with the big changes to the NDIS about a year ago. I made a video about that too. The issue was fraud, and instead they punished participants. Crack down heavily on fraud. See how much funding is saved, and then take the extreme measure of breaking the promises you made of not kicking permanently disabled people off the scheme. Let's try that, shall we? The work on fraud and integrity must continue. In a recent report, the National Audit Office concluded that prior to 2024, the NDIS lacked basic prevention controls for fraud and non-compliance. So you get through 10 years of this scheme before you have basic prevention controls for fraud and non-compliance. That's on you guys. That's a government thing. Please don't punish the participants for your oversights there. Australians are rightly appalled by the drumbeat of stories about shonks. Shonks. He says shonks and fraudsters. And in my head it's like, those nasty shonks and shysters. Australians are rightly appalled by the drumbeat of stories about shonks and fraudsters ripping off taxpayers and people with a disability, and I, for one, share their disgust. Our government has taken fraud seriously since 2024. Our government has taken fraud seriously, investing more than $500 million to build the capacity of the NDIA to identify high-risk claims and prevent fraud against the NDIS. In just 2 years, we've launched more than 600 investigations and executed 65 search warrants on individuals suspected of ripping off millions of dollars from people with disability and taxpayers. While there are currently more than 260,000 NDIS service providers, only 16,000 are registered. I'll repeat that. 15 out of 16 are unregistered, leaving far too much scope for poor quality service, sharp practice, conflicts of interest, and precious little oversight. This has to change. Well, you've got great NDIS auditors on your team, including ones that have been convicted for fraud in the past. Video up the top. Maybe if you're wanting to reduce fraud and investigate NDIS providers, you also need to look closer to home and see who is doing the investigating. Maybe that's a thing. To be fair, this is good stuff. This is what I want to hear in a speech about managing the spending and securing the future of the NDIS. However, it's kind of all I want to hear in a speech like this. At least I'd rather hear this than hear about who they won't allow on the NDIS or who they're going to remove from the NDIS. Again, move closer towards fixing the fraud before punishing those who are the victims of fraud. That's all I ask. The second challenge I mentioned earlier goes to an unintended aspect of the scheme's rollout, namely its enrolment of large numbers of young children with mild to moderate developmental delay and autism. Remember, the NDIS was established to support people with significant and permanent disability. Have you ever met someone with moderate autism? It is significant, and it is permanent. It affects different people in different ways, but it certainly affects them deeply. Since the scheme's creation, the number of people with disability entering the system has generally stabilized around initial projections, except in one area: children with developmental delay or autism. Cultural awareness can happen like that. It can happen like a wave when the taboo is removed about particular disabilities, about particular conditions. More people start talking about their child's diagnosis, and other parents and families start to recognize the symptoms and reach out for help and clarification. I think starting a national disability insurance scheme where taboos are lessened, where you're advocating for people to reach out and seek help, and where seeking help and seeking diagnosis is a prerequisite for getting assistance, there needs to be some awareness that numbers might balloon. They didn't think of that. Just under half of NDIS participants are children under 15. And fully half of new NDIS entrants are under the age of 9, most of whom have developmental delay or autism and are entering the scheme under the early intervention stream. I'm pretty sure that stream is set up so that once a child gets the necessary intervention, the situation is assessed to see if they will need ongoing support or if they've received enough support to manage their disability outside of the NDIS. Many people with developmental delay, once they get the appropriate support, once they sort of are helped to reach their milestones, they go through life without needing any extra disability support. It is sort of a temporary thing that holds them back a little bit, is essentially a block in front of reaching some of those milestones at the same points as other children. Once they do, they're on their way, they're fine. They will reach all the other life milestones where they should, where they can. With autism, it can be similar. It's that once people get the skills they need, they can go through life and it doesn't stop them as a disability. Many people with autism don't identify as having a disability or being disabled. But many do and many are. But yeah, he's not even talking about people in this case. He's not even necessarily talking about people who are lifelong participants on the NDIS, which is the main concern when it comes to funding projections. When they're talking about funding projections, they're talking about people who are on the NDIS for life, who will cost taxpayers money for life. When he's talking about the people who entered on early intervention streams, a lot of them won't continue on the NDIS once they get the intervention to meet their needs to continue on. Tens and tens of thousands of young children with mild to moderate developmental delay or autism are on a scheme set up for permanent disability. Mild to moderate developmental delay and autism can both be permanent disabilities. They're not, there's not, you don't need to other us from the disability community. They're not just conditions. They can also be disabilities. They both can have the ability to affect people in significant ways, making them reliant on disability services, sometimes for life. And there is also a system in place in the NDIS for helping children with disabilities that might not need lifelong support. He mentioned it. It's the early intervention stream. Plenty of people with disabilities won't need lifelong assistance from the NDIS if they get help at the right time. There is a system for that. And it streamlines it so that if they do need continuing help, their NDIS supports can be streamlined. They can keep going into the system rather than changing from one system to another. It also is just othering people. Within disability, you then get othered as that's not a real disability or you're not disabled enough. Will we get to the point where somebody who is an amputee won't be seen as disabled enough because once they're given a prosthetic limb, they're basically able-bodied? They're just fine. Are we going to get to that point? Somebody who has a chronic illness isn't disabled enough. We already see that. Isn't disabled enough because they don't need mobility aids. Not all of them. Not all the time. So they shouldn't be there either because that's not a permanent significant disability. We're probably going to get there. We just keep othering people in a community, in a minority that is already othered. I doubt very much this is what most of their parents really wanted or expected, but it's all they've had available. The only port in the storm, if you like. It's not what their parents wanted? Which bit? The child having a disability or the child receiving support for their disability? Very few parents wish for their child's life to be made more complicated and more difficult by a disability, but plenty of parents of disabled children do want their child to receive services that assist with their disability. That's pretty natural. Also, the only port in a storm, that's the fault of the NDIS. When the NDIS was formed, they essentially dismantled almost all other systems for receiving disability assistance. The states used to take care of this. The state funding used to take care of this. Not anymore. It was like, let's have a national system for doing this. And now the national system is saying, we weren't really prepared for all of you disabled people. I think you should be, go somewhere else. We're going to close this door to you. Like, yes, it's all the parents have available, and the NDIS has responsibility for that, which it now can't fulfill. Don't take out the competition if you can't carry the weight. They are desperate, absolutely desperate, to get their children diagnosed because we've made it the only way they can get help. And too often, they have to wait for ages and pay thousands of dollars just to get that diagnosis. Families looking for additional supports in mainstream services can't find them because they largely don't exist anymore. And in that, governments have failed them. You came so close. Came so close to it actually admitting exactly what the government did to screw people over. So close to admitting responsibility. So damn close. The NDIS model just doesn't suit their needs. Individualized plans and budgets make sense for people with lifelong disability, giving them more choice and control over the support they receive. But families with a young child who's missing some milestones aren't best helped by receiving a budget of $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 and being expected to work out how to spend it. I'm getting really frustrated with his repeated separation of people with autism and developmental delay and permanent disability. I'm autistic and my autism is permanent. It doesn't matter what the severity of my autism is. If my autism disables me, it is a permanent disability because it is a permanent condition. Also, children with more mild disabilities being given too much funding is not their fault. The planners need to be educated in what therapies and the frequency of those therapies actually help people with mild and moderate disabilities and to provide budgets for those needs. The solution isn't to say they're being given too much money, so take them off the scheme. Why not assess how much money is being spent and see if those funds can be allocated more wisely? Instead of, that's the thing with the NDIS, sometimes it is, we don't know what to do for this child, so give them an iPad and $30,000. Instead of, we don't know what to do for this child, so let's research it. Let's ask the child what they need help with, instead of just saying, what's our usual thing? We usually just give them 40 grand, right? So let's just give them that. Wait a minute, that child is using too much. Let's kick them off the NDIS. That's not the answer. And frankly, many of those children are then being overserviced. The extent of therapy provided to those children now in the NDIS is extremely high compared to anything you'd see in the health system. You're saying that like it's a bad thing. Wasn't the NDIS created to meet the needs of the disability community that weren't being met by the health system? Like the health system was letting us down. You create a national disability insurance scheme, and now it's like, people are getting so much help on this. This is crazy. This is crazy. The amount of help children are getting on the NDIS is extremely high. Oh, that's terrible. On average, just average, a young NDIS participant with moderate needs is receiving more than 70 therapy sessions per year. There is no evidence I'm aware of that supports children being taken away from learning and other activities for that much therapy. So that lands at 5 a month. Just over 5 a month, or perhaps maybe twice a week during the school year as it lands that way. I have to say, as a person with autism, as initially assessed at level 1, although my current therapist has questions about whether it might be higher, I would have greatly benefited from at least a session or 2 of therapy a week. Taken away from learning, what do you think therapy is? Therapy is learning. Therapy is learning. For children who sometimes can't get everything they can out of the lessons in a standardized classroom, therapy is learning. Therapy can give them the tools they need to navigate that classroom, to navigate the playground, to navigate their sports team, their family life. I didn't have therapy as a mildly autistic child, and I developed some incredibly unhealthy thought patterns and activity patterns that do not serve me well as an adult. Meaning that now on the NDIS, I get regular therapy as an autistic adult. If I got early intervention, probably wouldn't be costing the NDIS money as an autistic adult for the rest of my life. Although they're probably going to kick me off of that, and I'll go into the mental health system, which, as we know, has a lot of vacancies. The mental health system for adults, so much room, so much resources and money for people, I would probably be able to get like 5 sessions a year. Whereas currently I only survive in the world if I get at least, 20. So that's going to be great. But like school was a difficult place for me because I didn't speak the social language. A session of therapy a week where I could learn that language, as well as learning my own strengths, finding confidence and understanding, would have saved me decades, literally decades of pain. But the Honourable Mark Butler doesn't know any evidence of this, so screw that. Screw me, screw all of the observational evidence, all the experiential evidence of many, many families who see their child blossom through therapy, who see that their child only engages in the mainstream classroom after they've experienced therapy. Screw that. And the scheme doesn't require any such evidence, unlike Medicare, for example, which would subject such a regimen to rigorous assessment before funding it. What? Anything that is requested on the NDIS must go through hoops upon hoops upon hoops of proof before it's funded. You can't ask for something simply because you think it might help, or somebody said it would, or even because the practitioner recommended it. Like, I don't know what scheme Mark Butler gets his plans through, but for most of us, if we don't have adequate proof for a service we want to use, it will get knocked back. There's not enough evidentiary proof. We don't get that service. That's how it tends to work on the NDIS. Only around 1 in 50 people have significant and permanent disability, hence the need for a bespoke scheme like the NDIS. But 10 in 50 young children experience developmental delay or autism, mostly at mild to moderate levels. Okay. Again, autism is a permanent condition, and if the autism is moderate, then it will likely affect the person in a significant way, and they might identify as somebody with a disability, making life complicated and difficult and causing them to rely on services around them because their way of interacting with the world may not be the same as a person without their condition. So moderate autism is always permanent and often a permanent disability. Developmental delay is not always permanent, but it can be, depending on the cause, and a person or a child with temporary developmental delay can still have a place in the NDIS because the scheme has created the early intervention pipeline so that children can receive help, and if it was found that their childhood condition will continue into adulthood, they can have an easy transition into disability services. Can we not keep separating? Can we not have this? Can we not divide disabled people? Can we not? If somebody identifies as disabled, if their condition disables them, if their condition is making a significant impact, it doesn't matter what their diagnosis is. You can't say this diagnosis is not disabling because I think it's moderate. If it impacts their life to the degree where they are disabled, come on, dude. That's a broad-based mainstream issue that should be supported by broad-based mainstream services. I don't know if you've ever met a child with developmental delay or neurodivergence, but often mainstream services don't really work for us. Or with us, to be honest. We were meant to find a home in the system where our needs were looked at and looked after. The NDIS. I'm talking about the NDIS, but in the mainstream, our needs are often considered to be too much. Or we're expected to jump through certain hoops and tick certain boxes before our needs are met. It's like, yes, you can join our party after you become this. And now in the NDIS, our needs are considered to be not enough. So we're either too much or not enough. That's really comforting. Story of our friggin' lives. As people with, I didn't have developmental delay. I do have autism. Part of the reason why my autism took so long to be diagnosed was because I didn't have developmental delay. My needs weren't correct. And now my needs aren't correct. We need, as a matter of some urgency, to create a better system that will enable our children to thrive. They are precious. We love them. And they are our future. Children with mild to moderate developmental delay or autism need a robust system of supports to help them thrive. A program for thriving kids. And that's the program I intend to deliver. I'm still waiting to find out where the adults with mild to moderate developmental delay and autism fit in, because it's been made quite clear that we don't fit in with the NDIS. But the name Thriving Kids makes me feel like this new program isn't for us either. If I don't have a permanent disability with my mild to moderate autism, and if somebody doesn't have a permanent disability with their developmental delay, but I'm not a thriving kid. I don't know if you've noticed, not a thriving kid. Where do I go, Mark? Where do I go? The systems already exist. To be leveraged and focused, we need to look for the gaps and focus on how to fill them. Everything we do here must aim to identify needs as early as possible in a child's life and get them and their parents the intervention that will work best for them. Almost like an early intervention system? Oh no, wait, that's an NDIS thing. That's not for those children. It's not for these ones. They have to go elsewhere. We will examine the creation of a new Medicare item for bulk billed 3-year-old health checks to pick up any developmental concerns at that crucial age for referral for appropriate support. Improved decision-making tools for health professionals and better workforce training on child development will help create a stronger system of supports for children and their parents. The College of General Practitioners has been calling for some years for a child development check like this to be re-established because they worked. Where these checks find that kids need additional supports, we will look at providing access to new Medicare allied health items. Things like occupational therapy to strengthen play skills, fine and gross motor skills, concentration and self-regulation. Speech pathology to support speech, language, literacy, as well as the use of signs, symbols and gestures to help support kids to communicate and build relationships. And psychosocial therapy to support developing essential social skills, emotional regulation, and executive function. Does he realize that these are the kind of therapies that school-age children with mild to moderate developmental delay and autism need? Like the kind they might need once a week? The kind he said there is no evidence I'm aware of that supports children being taken away from learning and other activities for that much therapy? Which is it, Mark? Is the therapy beneficial to these children, or is there no benefit to children being taken away from other activities, which they might not be able to enjoy in their full capacity without therapy? Do you want the children to have therapy, or do you not? Do you think the children need therapy, or do you not? Or is it just that you don't want them on the scheme? You think they're costing you too much money. It's okay if you say it. You just need to say it. You just need to say the thing, not cushion it in something else. Just say we're not the right kind of disabled. You can say we're not the right kind of disabled. It'll make you look kind of awful, but it will make more sense. Our $1 billion Building Early Education Fund is an opportunity to work together with state and local government, philanthropic organizations and communities to bring a whole range of related and important services under the same roof. And schools can play a more coordinated role instead of the individualized NDIS approach that sees school principals reporting dozens of different therapists turning up to their school to provide therapy to individual students. Okay, part of the reason the NDIS works when it does is because it recognizes that disability is not one size fits all. He's saying instead of that individualized NDIS approach, as if that's a bad thing, the individualized NDIS approach was part of the appeal, is part of the appeal. Why would you have a bunch of different therapists arriving at school providing therapy to individual students? Because those students are individuals with different needs. But they're all autistic. Or they all have mild developmental delay. Yeah, still individuals. Still different needs. Again, you can't always use a mainstream system here where you put all of us in a room and use the same therapeutic approach and expect us all to turn out great. Expect us all to learn the things we had to learn. You know where that was used? Institutions. Put all the disableds under one roof, teach them the same lesson, expect them to fall into line. Sometimes they did separate us up into our different kinds. You know, the wheelie ones in that room and the wriggly ones in that room and the really yelly ones in that room. I'm in a bit of trouble because I'm multiple little guys. But yeah. Put us into one room. Teach us the same thing because we're the same kind of disabled. And if you're the same kind of disabled, then you have the same needs. There isn't an individualistic need when you're autistic, apparently. I don't know. Is that what Mark is saying? That if people with autism have the same needs, you don't have individualized needs, so you can be met by essentially a mainstream system. Why would you need different individual therapists for autistic children. They don't have individual needs, so it's just a waste of money. It's like being surprised that different physically disabled people have different physiotherapists or exercise physiologists instead of like us all going to a center where we work out together. Like, guess what? Our bodies are different. Multiple people with spinal injuries need different exercise physiologists and physiotherapists. Did you know that? Or should we save money and give multiple people with spine injuries just one guy? Just send them to one workout room. Like, we need somebody who understands our body and our goals and the way we're different. We need somebody who understands our brain and our goals and the way we're different. People with mild autism aren't all the same. Somebody will have issues with speaking, but they're fine with wearing any clothes or eating any food. Others will love really loud music, but they can't listen to anyone speak. Like, can you put them in the same room? Can you put an autistic person who has trouble with language but loves loud music in the same room with somebody who, like, hates loud music and loves talking all the time and monologues all the time? No. People need to learn different skills because people have different strengths. Can you also do that while not providing individual therapy to give them the tools to coexist under that roof? I'm really mad. I'm getting really mad. It really was an enormous privilege to be asked by the Prime Minister to take responsibility for health, disability and ageing after this year's election. I find myself wondering if the NDIS will ever truly be in the hands of somebody we can trust. I thought I could trust Bill Shorten, and then he put his mark of approval on the disruptive and upsetting changes to the legislation last year. Video linked. Now we have somebody who consistently separates some disabilities as more or less real or legitimate than the rest, dividing our community when the NDIS was meant to bring us together as equals. We all have disabilities, we all have needs, and we can get help, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. The issue is the moderation of funding and the fraud, but the reaction of taking people off the scheme feels divisive and cruel. You know what? I do think the NDIS will be in the hands of someone I can trust one day, when that someone has a disability. Those are my thoughts on Honourable Mark Butler, the Minister for Health, Aging, Disability and the NDIS, on his chat about the changes. I've been going on for a long time because there was a lot to cover. I needed to cover all of it. I am really concerned. I am incredibly concerned. As somebody who is autistic, I cannot cope without therapy. I'm in a relationship. I'm in a happy relationship, but I frequently have to talk to my therapist about communication issues that I have in my relationship because I don't process things like a typical person. I still have conversations where I end up hitting my head repeatedly because I can't process things. I have a disability. I have a disability in my brain because of my autism. And my autism is considered mild. And my mild autism leads me to bash myself in the head if I don't understand what somebody is telling me. Okay? My autism leads me to not understand when people are lying to me or telling me the truth, which means that I am in a whole lot of danger when I speak to people, when I make agreements with people. So I need to talk to my therapist to regularly unpack a lot of those things. I have a lot of trauma from being at school, from not understanding things around me. I probably would be a lot more okay now if I had access to therapy as a child. I am disabled. And the thing is, the less support people have as children, the more disabled they will be as adults. Maybe there are people who are disabled with their autism as adults who would not be disabled in their autism as adults if they had received help as children, because autism is not always a disability. There are many conditions that become disabilities due to their severity. They're conditions, they're health conditions, they're neurological conditions, but they become disabilities due to their severity, and autism is one of them. If autism is managed, if autism doesn't impact life in a very significant way, it's a condition. Not everyone with autism identifies as disabled. Many of us do, and for many of us, it could have been overcome with therapy in the right places, which the NDIS is in a position to provide. But the excuses, I see them as excuses of there's fraud and people are given too much money. Then stop giving them so much money. Don't kick them off the scheme entirely. Control the amount of money and funding that people are given. Saying that therapy being given to children and taking them out of class and taking them away from learning isn't worth it. I said what I said. You heard me. I am infuriated and I am heartbroken. And I know that my therapy will probably be removed because I am on the NDIS for my physical disability. This guy. But I'm also on there as my autism is my secondary disability because I require help for that. But that will probably get removed. And then my therapy will go to the public mental health system, which is incredibly underfunded. And in my area, there's no one. They can say go to the mainstream system, but then those of us in rural areas, there is nothing. There is nothing. Even in my area, there are very few therapists who actually have wheelchair access or a wheelchair bathroom. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, especially for complex mental health issues. It's you're saying you don't fit here, so please leave. I'm sure you'll find something out there, and closing the door. Why? Why is our minister for the disability insurance scheme, why is that person not a disabled person? I don't understand. I do understand, but I don't. Okay, that's all for this one. I had to make this. I had to talk about this. Please share this far and wide because I don't know how many people will actually read his speech or do anything like that, but I would like people to watch this video because I cherry-picked some good bits. Read the whole thing, though. Read the whole thing. Get mad with me. All right. That's all for this one. See you in the next one. All right. Bless.